In all my 300 cycles serving as the Chief Safety Inspector for the Galactic Engineering Corps, I never imagined I'd resign over a single incident. And yet, here I am, finalizing this report as my last official duty before retreating to my homeworld to embrace a far less perilous pursuit in quantum physics. What could drive me to such a decision? Let me recount the day when a human engineer defied every safety regulation in existence and survived. As members of the Galactic Safety Standards Enforcement (GSSE), we hold ourselves to an impeccable level of precision and rigor. Our rules are exhaustive, definitive, and entirely unbendable. Or at least that was the intent until humanity joined the Galactic Federation. I am Kexel, formerly head of the most esteemed safety inspection unit in the known universe. My team was composed of elite specialists from 17 distinct species. Among them was Vextari, my deputy inspector, renowned for her 6 eyes that could detect a microscopic fissure in a containment field from 50 meters away. Then there was Zinthor, our chief engineering analyst, whose computational organ could calculate risks faster than even the latest quantum processors. We were the gold standard, the team called in to ensure everything operated flawlessly. Inspections of human facilities, however, proved to be unconventional. On our inaugural visit to the MS colony, we discovered that their life support system had been repaired with something they referred to as duct tape. Yes, duct tape. When we demanded an explanation, the humans merely shrugged and said, "It works better than the original component." That day, we documented 27 violations. Not one of them was corrected, and, astonishingly, that life support system is still operational 5 years later. But the Proxima Centa power station was supposed to be different. It was humanity's newest marvel, constructed to align with our stringent specifications and compliant with every standard. At least, that's what the documentation claimed. Reflecting on it now, I should have seen the red flags from the start. The first indication came when we toured their break room. The amount of caffeine they consumed would be fatal to my species in moments. They had a machine called a coffee maker that operated incessantly, day and night. The reverence they showed this device bordered on religious zeal, far surpassing their regard for safety protocols. Then there were the modifications. At first, they were subtle, a rerouted conduit here, an improvised adjustment there. None of it blatantly violated regulations, but all of it set my antennae on edge. When I questioned these changes, their chief engineer flashed a grin and replied, "We like to keep things exciting." Exciting? Safety measures are not meant to be exciting. They are designed to be consistent, predictable, and impervious to failure. But humans seem to have an entirely different interpretation of what fail-safe means. The truly alarming issue was their casual approach to radiation safety. We discovered their radiation technicians casually playing card games in areas we would have immediately designated for evacuation. When our sensors flagged radiation levels high enough to activate containment protocols, they brushed it off with a nonchalant background radiation. Just another Tuesday, I recall standing in their main control room, observing their team at work. They moved with a confidence so relaxed it bordered on recklessness. While my team adhered to strict safety procedures, triple-checking every reading, the humans flitted around their workstations as if performing some chaotic dance, juggling intricate reactor adjustments with what they referred to as workplace banter. My personal computing unit logged 73 potential safety violations in the first hour alone. Yet, every time we raised an issue, they had a response. Not a compliant response, mind you, but one that, inexplicably, seemed to function. It contradicted everything we understood about sound engineering practices. Unbeknownst to me, this was merely the prelude. Had I known what was about to transpire, I would have ordered an immediate evacuation of the facility. But hindsight, as humans say, is 20/20, a phrase I still struggle to understand. As I compile this report, I find myself questioning, were our regulations ever truly equipped to handle humanity? Or were we attempting to impose logical standards on a species that seemingly excels by defying them? And then there was Miranda Rodriguez. The moment she entered the reactor control room, balancing what appeared to be her 4th cup of coffee in one hand and a half-eaten sandwich in the other, I knew she was going to be a problem. Not because she seemed dangerous, quite the opposite, in fact. Her disarming smile seemed to inspire trust, which, in retrospect, was likely how she managed to bypass so many safety rules. Let me set the scene of our first meeting. I was meticulously reviewing the reactor's morning efficiency reports alongside Vextari when Miranda practically bounded into the room. Yes, bounded. Humans rarely settle for walking. They prefer to stride, bounce, or swagger with unrestrained energy. "Ah, the inspection team," she exclaimed cheerfully, somehow managing to shake my hand while still clutching her coffee and sandwich. "Welcome to my playground." Playground, the word sent a shiver through my antennae. My reaction must have been obvious because she quickly added, "Figure of speech. Although I do have a lot of fun here, in a nuclear reactor facility. My third heart missed a beat. What followed was nothing short of organized chaos. As the lead reactor engineer, Miranda's role was to demonstrate their safety procedures. Instead, she launched into what she gleefully referred to as the highlight reel. She zipped through the facility like a whirlwind, showcasing modifications she had made to our meticulously designed systems. "See this coolant system?" she said, pointing to what had once been a standard issue Class 7 thermal regulator. "I re-engineered it to handle 30% more load by installing these bypass valves here and here." Zinthor's computational organ emitted a distressed hum. But the original specifications were already at maximum safe capacity. Miranda responded with nothing more than a laugh, a sound that, in hindsight, I will never forget. "Sure, by standard calculations. But if you consider the thermal expansion coefficient of the new alloy we're using and incorporate this emergency shutoff I designed," she gave the machine a fond pat, as if it were a beloved pet. Yes, she actually patted it. Every single modification she unveiled was equal parts ingenious and terrifying. Miranda had taken our most stable and rigorously tested designs and pushed them far beyond their intended capabilities. The most unsettling part? Everything worked flawlessly. Her personal workstation was another revelation. It was covered in what she referred to as sticky notes, small yellow squares scrawled with human handwriting, detailing critical reactor data that should have been securely logged in our central database. When I pointed this out, she simply shrugged and said, "Sometimes typing everything out takes too long when I'm in the middle of an experiment in a nuclear reactor." The following hours were a whirlwind of violations. Miranda had reprogrammed the emergency shutdown sequence because, according to her, the original took too long and wasted too much power. She'd modified the radiation shielding to be retractable, explaining, "Sometimes you just need to get in there and fix things hands-on." Hands-on in a nuclear reactor. Let that sink in. But the moment that truly made my antennae quiver in dread came during our inspection of the core monitoring system. Miranda was enthusiastically explaining her latest upgrade when a warning light began to flash. "Oh, that's just the containment field fluctuating again," she said, as though it were a minor inconvenience. She reached over to tweak some controls. "Fluctuating containment fields are a level 1 emergency." I nearly screamed. She waved off my concern. "Sure, if you're following the manual. But I've found that if you cycle the magnetic resonance at just the right frequency," the warning light blinked off. "See? Problem solved." "That's not solving the problem," I shouted. "That's bypassing the safety system specifically designed to prevent catastrophic reactor failure." Miranda turned to me, still clutching her ever-present coffee cup. "Look, Chief Inspector," she began, "our job is to keep this reactor running efficiently and safely. Sometimes that means thinking outside the box. Your safety protocols are great guidelines, but that's all they are, guidelines. Guidelines, they are not guidelines. They are meticulously calculated parameters to avert disaster." And then, as if to add insult to injury, she gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "We appreciate them, really," she said with a smile, "but you've got to admit some of them are a bit overly cautious." The remainder of the inspection passed with my anxiety mounting at every turn. Miranda worked with boundless enthusiasm, explaining her modifications as though she were giving a lecture to eager students, utterly unaware of the horror she was inspiring in my team. The most unsettling part? Her innovations were effective. Every single one. The reactor was operating at an astonishing 143% of its original design capacity, while consuming 27% less fuel than our models deemed theoretically possible. It defied all logic. If only I had known then what I know now. If only I'd realized this was just the beginning. Sure, by standard calculations. But if you consider the thermal expansion coefficient of the new alloy we're using and incorporate this emergency shutoff I designed, she gave the machine a fond pat, as if it were a beloved pet. Yes, she actually patted it. Every single modification she unveiled was equal parts ingenious and terrifying. Miranda had taken our most stable and rigorously tested designs and pushed them far beyond their intended capabilities. The most unsettling part? Everything worked flawlessly. Her personal workstation was another revelation. It was covered in what she referred to as sticky notes, small yellow squares scrawled with human handwriting, detailing critical reactor data that should have been securely logged in our central database. When I pointed this out, she simply shrugged and said, "Sometimes typing everything out takes too long when I'm in the middle of an experiment in a nuclear reactor." The following hours were a whirlwind of violations. Miranda had reprogrammed the emergency shutdown sequence because, according to her, the original took too long and wasted too much power. She'd modified the radiation shielding to be retractable, explaining, "Sometimes you just need to get in there and fix things hands-on." Hands-on in a nuclear reactor. Let that sink in. But the moment that truly made my antennae quiver in dread came during our inspection of the core monitoring system. Miranda was enthusiastically explaining her latest upgrade when a warning light began to flash. "Oh, that's just the containment field fluctuating again," she said, as though it were a minor inconvenience. She reached over to tweak some controls. "Fluctuating containment fields are a level 1 emergency." I nearly screamed. She waved off my concern. "Sure, if you're following the manual. But I found that if you cycle the magnetic resonance at just the right frequency, the warning light blinked off. See? Problem solved." "That's not solving the problem," I shouted. "That's bypassing the safety system specifically designed to prevent catastrophic reactor failure." Miranda turned to me, still clutching her ever-present coffee cup. "Look, Chief Inspector," she began, "our job is to keep this reactor running efficiently and safely. Sometimes that means thinking outside the box. Your safety protocols are great guidelines, but that's all they are, guidelines. Guidelines, they are not guidelines. They are meticulously calculated parameters to avert disaster." And then, as if to add insult to injury, she gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "We appreciate them, really," she said with a smile, "but you've got to admit some of them are a bit overly cautious." The remainder of the inspection passed with my anxiety mounting at every turn. Miranda worked with boundless enthusiasm, explaining her modifications as though she were giving a lecture to eager students, utterly unaware of the horror she was inspiring in my team. The most unsettling part? Her innovations were effective. Every single one. The reactor was operating at an astonishing 143% of its original design capacity, while consuming 27% less fuel than our models deemed theoretically possible. It defied all logic. If only I had known then what I know now. If only I'd realized this was just the beginning. But then the impossible happened. The lights dimmed. The radiation levels dropped. Not to safe levels, not even close, but they dropped. And then the communications panel crackled to life. "Hey, guys," Miranda's voice chimed in, oddly cheerful for someone who should have been very, very dead. "So, good news and bad news. Good news is I stopped a full core breach. Bad news is, well, we're gonna need some new equipment, and probably a new ceiling for the reactor room. Oh, and I might be slightly irradiated. Nothing serious, though. Nothing serious? Nothing serious. The readings on our instruments showed she'd been exposed to enough radiation to kill any known species several times over. When we finally re-entered the reactor room, after radiation levels dropped to merely extremely dangerous instead of instantly lethal, we found Miranda sitting on what was left of her workstation, jotting notes on one of those infamous sticky papers. Half the reactor room was simply gone, vaporized. The reactor core itself was a warped tangle of metal and energy, barely held together by whatever makeshift solution she'd conjured on the fly. Yet there she was, alive, talking, and most disturbingly, already planning repairs. How are you not dead?" I managed to stammer, my voice barely audible. She glanced down at the burns on her arm, as if noticing them for the first time. "Oh, humans are pretty radiation resistant compared to most species. Something about how our DNA repairs itself, I think. Plus, I took some potassium iodide tablets this morning. Had a feeling it might be one of those days. One of those days, one of those days." Miranda had survived a radiation dose so extreme that our medical equipment struggled to quantify it. The truly horrifying part? She'd actually fixed the reactor. Not perfectly, not by the book, and certainly not within any conceivable safety parameters. But it was stable. Somehow, in the brief chaos between a coffee spill and an inevitable meltdown, she had invented an entirely new method of containing a runaway reaction. When the emergency response teams finally arrived, they found Miranda calmly sketching out her modifications on the back of an old maintenance report. "You know," she said, holding up the rough diagrams, "I think we can make this permanent. It's actually more efficient than the old containment system." "More efficient?" I repeated, incredulous. "Yeah, the energy bleed off from the near meltdown gave me some ideas. If we reroute the containment field through these points here," she continued, animatedly explaining her impromptu redesign, seemingly oblivious to the fact that she was defying every known medical and engineering precedent. Dr. Blake Chun, the human medical officer, finally convinced her to head to the medical bay for observation. But not before she finished detailing her modifications to the thoroughly baffled emergency team. Miranda walked to the medical bay under her own power, still talking about ways to optimize the system. The last thing she said before the medical bay doors closed behind her was, "Oh, and someone should probably clean up that coffee. We don't want another incident." I stood there, staring at the wreckage of the reactor room, at the makeshift containment solutions that seemed to defy the very laws of physics, and at the data readings that insisted nothing inside that room should be alive. And in that moment, I made a decision. I was done. We were all done. There's careful engineering engineering, there's pushing the boundaries, and then there's whatever humans call engineering. This was beyond anything we could regulate, beyond anything we could even comprehend. A quick glance at my team confirmed they felt the same. Vex Taria's 6 eyes were wide with a mix of shock and disbelief. Zinthor's computational organ had entered sleep mode, seemingly unable to process the sheer absurdity of what we had just witnessed. Later, when we reviewed the medical scans, we discovered Miranda had endured nearly 15 times the radiation exposure we deemed unsurvivable. Her only complaint? She had missed lunch because of the excitement. It was 14:33 station time when things truly spiraled into what we in the engineering core call falling into a quantum singularity. The reactor core wasn't just overheating anymore, it was tearing itself apart. Energy levels surged into ranges that exceeded the capabilities of our instruments. The containment field generators wailed as they strained well past their maximum capacity. Through the observation cameras, we watched in muted horror as Miranda sprinted across the reactor room floor. She moved with a sense of calm purpose, pulling open panels and rerouting power conduits as casually as if she were making a sandwich instead of trying to stave off complete annihilation. "Look at these readings," Vex Tari shouted, her voice rising with panic as all 6 eyes fixed on the monitoring station. The core temperatures approaching the point where atomic bonds start to destabilize, but Miranda wasn't retreating. She was charging toward the reactor core. Her tablet was clutched in one hand, her thumb furiously tapping out calculations, while her other hand pulled tools from the many pockets of her heavily modified radiation suit. The suit itself was glowing, glowing under the relentless assault of radiation. The first explosion shook the entire facility. A coolant line ruptured, sending superheated plasma spraying across 3 walls and part of the ceiling. Standard safety protocols activated immediately, attempting to seal off the damaged sections. Miranda, however, simply leapt over the descending containment barriers, rolled under a stream of plasma, and continued working as if none of it fazed her. Through the failing camera feed, we could hear her muttering to herself. "Alright, if I reroute the magnetic containment field through the secondary cooling system, no, that'll just accelerate the cascade. Unless," she hesitated, and then, against all logic, she smiled. "Unless that's exactly what we need." The second explosion dwarfed the first. The reinforced observation windows, designed to withstand direct meteor impacts, splintered under the force. The radiation alarms, which had been blaring incessantly, suddenly fell silent. Not because the danger had passed, but because the sensors had been obliterated. "Got it." Miranda's voice crackled through the failing comm system. "You might want to close your eyes for this next part." And then the reactor core erupted. There's no other way to describe it. A blinding flash of light transformed the entire chamber into a miniature sun. When the cameras recovered several seconds later, a third of the reactor room had vanished. Vaporized. Gone. The space where it had once stood now glowed with residual plasma energy. And there, at the epicenter of it all, stood Miranda Rodriguez. Her radiation suit was partially melted, with one sleeve entirely missing. In her remaining gloved hand, she held what appeared to be a makeshift control rod, wielding it with the precision of a conductor leading an apocalyptic symphony. She used it to redirect plasma flows, orchestrating chaos into order. The truly impossible part wasn't that she survived the initial explosion. It wasn't even that she managed to avert a total core breach. No, the impossible part was what she did next. Rather than attempting to contain the reaction outright, Miranda triggered a series of smaller, controlled breaches. Each one should have been fatal. Each one released enough radiation to sterilize a small moon. Yet, unbelievably, these controlled breaches formed a coherent pattern. "She's using the plasma vents to create a magnetic bottleneck," Zinthor whispered, his computational organ barely able to process the spectacle. "She's turning the entire reactor room into a giant containment field." The energy readings began to stabilize. Not at safe levels, nothing about this was safe, but at predictable ones. Miranda had improvised an entirely new form of reactor containment, leveraging the destructive forces themselves to prevent total annihilation. When the emergency teams finally reached the reactor room, they found her sitting calmly on a fragment of what used to be the main control console, scribbling equations on her scorched tablet with her still functioning hand. The tablet's screen was half melted. "You know," she said as they rushed in with radiation meters and medical kits, "I think I just accidentally invented a new type of fusion containment. Anyone have a pen? My tablet's kind of fried." The medical team's instruments recorded radiation exposure levels so extreme they repeatedly broke their calibration limits. The Geiger counters didn't just click, they emitted a cacophony that sounded like a full orchestra in disarray. Miranda merely shrugged when informed of the readings. "Yeah, that tracks. Good thing I took my rad meds this this morning. Might need an extra dose, though, and maybe some aloe vera for the sunburn. Sunburn, she called radiation burns severe enough to incinerate most species from the inside out. A sunburn. The next few hours were chaos. Medical teams couldn't decide whether to treat her or study her. Engineering teams debated whether to shut down her ad hoc containment system or write entire theses about it. Even the facility's AI suffered a minor breakdown, unable to reconcile its data with what it deemed physically possible. The most unsettling part? Miranda was already discussing improvements. See, if we integrate this containment method into the original reactor design, she mused, sketching on a scrap of paper since her tablet had finally succumbed, we could boost efficiency by at least 40%. Though we might want to reinforce the ceiling next time, and maybe stock up on better radiation suits, Miranda added. Her tone is casual, as if she were discussing office supplies. Dr. Chun arrived shortly afterward, carrying a medkit. He glanced at Miranda's readings and burst into laughter. Only you, Miranda, he said, shaking his head. Only you could walk away from a core breach with nothing but a sunburn and ideas for improvement. It was in that moment that I finally understood the true terror of human engineering. It wasn't just that they could survive the unsurvivable, although that was unsettling enough. No, the real horror lay in how they viewed such incidents as opportunities for growth and innovation. Once the initial emergency response had stabilized the situation as much as it ever could be, I found Miranda in what remained of the break room, brewing herself a fresh cup of coffee. You know, she said cheerfully, holding out a cup, which I declined with more haste than dignity. I've been thinking about that radiation exposure issue. What if we designed suits that could harness ambient radiation and convert it into usable power? Could come in handy for situations like this. I submitted my resignation that same hour. Some species are simply not meant to understand humans and their peculiar relationship with physics, safety, and what they audaciously call acceptable risks. The most unsettling part? The Galactic Engineering Corps approved her radiation harnessing suit design 3 weeks later. They're calling it the Rodriguez Principle of Catastrophic Energy Conversion. I hear their standard issue now. The official investigation commenced 3 days after the incident, 3 days that fundamentally altered our understanding of human physiology, engineering, and the boundaries of what is possible in the universe. The first findings to arrive were the medical examination results, presented by Dr. Blake Chun, who looked as though he had uncovered a new fundamental force of nature. Perhaps, in a way, he had. Before I begin, Dr. Chun said to the investigation board, his grin as wide as a black hole, I want to note that these results have been triple verified. Not because I doubted them, I've worked with humans long enough to expect the impossible, but because I know you're going to demand it. The holographic display lit up with Miranda's medical scans. Even to my untrained eyes, they were astonishing. Her cells weren't merely surviving, they were thriving. Where radiation exposure should have shattered DNA strands beyond repair, her genetic material seemed to be adapting, almost evolving. Take a look at this, Dr. Chun said, highlighting a particularly active cluster of cells. At these radiation levels, normal cellular structures should undergo immediate collapse. Instead, her cells are exhibiting accelerated mitosis while simultaneously developing enhanced radiation resistance. It's as though her DNA treated the apocalyptic exposure as a personal challenge. But that's impossible, Vex Tari interjected, all 6 eyes fixed on the display. The radiation levels recorded were sufficient to sterilize a small moon. Dr. Chen's grin somehow widened. That's the truly fascinating part. Humans have always displayed remarkable radiation resistance compared to most species. Their DNA repair mechanisms are already exceptional. But Miranda's exposure should have overwhelmed even those abilities. And yet, here we are. Instead, Dr. Chun gestured to another set of scans. We're seeing adaptation. I felt my third heart skip several beats. You mean? Yes. He nodded enthusiastically. Her cells aren't just repairing the damage, they're improving at handling radiation. It's like witnessing evolution in fast forward. Absolutely fascinating from a medical standpoint, though it does make writing safety protocols a bit more challenging. The engineering analysis provided no comfort either. Our top quantum physics experts spent an entire week dissecting Miranda's improvised containment solution. When their report finally arrived, it read more like existential poetry than hard science. The physics don't add up, the head researcher announced, twitching slightly as he spoke. The mathematics suggest this should have caused the complete atomic dissolution of the facility and everything within a 50-kilometer radius. He gestured toward the still intact facility. And yet, here we are. Miranda's solution hadn't just contained the reactor breach. It had created a completely new type of plasma containment field, one that, according to our most advanced theoretical models, shouldn't exist. The energy patterns she had generated were supposed to collapse into a localized quantum singularity. Instead, they stabilized into what one physicist described as a perfectly improbable state of persistent impossibility. When we presented the analysis to Miranda, she simply shrugged. "Yeah, the math looked a bit weird at first," she admitted, "but I figured if I inverted the containment field's polarity at just the right moment, the resulting energy cascade would probably sort itself out. And if it didn't, well, we wouldn't be around to worry about it anyway." Probably sort itself out. The resignation letters started rolling in during the second week of the investigation. The first came from our senior theoretical physicist, who wrote simply, "If humans can do this by accident, I no longer trust my understanding of the universe. I'm going to become a poet." Others followed. Our containment field specialists resigned after Miranda casually suggested improvements to their life's work. The radiation safety team quit en masse when they realized their meticulously crafted protocols were little more than polite suggestions to humans. The truth about human radiation resistance, we discovered, wasn't just a matter of biology. It extended to their entire worldview. Where we saw lethal danger, they saw manageable inconvenience. Where we calculated impossible odds, they saw acceptable risks. Dr. Chen's final report included a note that quickly became infamous in medical circles. Human adaptability appears to extend beyond biological responses. Their psychological acceptance of what should be impossibly dangerous situations seems to influence physical outcomes. Further research is needed, though finding non-human volunteers for such studies may prove difficult. After this incident, the Galactic Engineering Corps officially classified humans as probability anomalies. It was the only way they could reconcile the continued existence of human engineers with the laws of physics as we understood them. Miranda, meanwhile, had already returned to work. Within days, she had submitted 17 patent applications inspired by her near-death experience. Among them was a design for a coffee cup holder with integrated radiation shielding. The truth about human radiation resistance? It wasn't resistance at all. It was their fundamental refusal to accept that something was impossible simply because every known law of physics said so. As I finalized my own resignation letter, I glanced at Miranda's latest project notes. She was already drafting modifications to make the reactor even more efficient, drawing directly from what she'd learned from almost vaporizing herself. The last line of my resignation letter read, "I hereby recommend that all future safety protocols for human-operated facilities include the provision that standard physics models may be considered optional guidelines rather than immutable laws. May whatever gods exist help us all." The great engineering exodus, as it came to be known, began exactly 1 month after the incident. By the end of that month, 73% of the Galactic Engineering Corps' non-human personnel had resigned. The official explanation was mass retirement. The unofficial explanation? Humans. I still remember my final day at GSSE headquarters. I was packing up my office when Miranda stopped by, holding a cup of coffee in a newly designed radiation-shielded mug. "You know," she said, leaning casually against the door frame, "I still don't get why everyone's leaving. We solved the containment problem, made it better even." "That's exactly why we're leaving," I tried to explain. "You turned a catastrophic reactor failure into a research opportunity. That's not how engineering is supposed to work." She laughed. "Sure it is. Some of humanity's best innovations came from things going horribly wrong. Did I ever tell you about the guy who invented superglue? Total accident. He was trying to make plastic gun sights. The new safety protocols implemented after the incident read more like surrender documents than engineering guidelines. I should know. I helped draft them before I left. Some highlights. Section 1. Human engineering protocols assume all physics equations are subject to human interpretation. Previous impossibility ratings are now considered human challenges. Keep spare radiation suits rated for stellar core conditions stocked. Coffee makers must be secured against spillage. Always have a backup plan for the backup plan's backup plan. Section 2. Emergency response guidelines. If a human says, "It's fine," evacuate immediately. If a human says, "I have an idea," evacuate faster. If a human looks excited about a malfunction, evacuate at light speed. The Galactic Federation's understanding of human capabilities underwent a complete overhaul. Humans were reclassified from Class C tool users to Class X probability manipulators. The X was added specifically for humans, as no existing classification could adequately describe a species that treated fundamental physics like polite suggestions. My successor, the unfortunate compassionate soul, was selected for their ability to adapt to human methodologies. Their primary qualification, surviving an antimatter containment breach by, and I quote, winging it, they'll fit right in with the humans, I suppose. The most sardonic part of all this? The humans were right. Their modifications worked. Their impossible solutions proved possible. Their casual disregard for what we considered immutable laws of physics somehow bent reality to match their expectations. The reactor core breach incident is now a case study at the Galactic Engineering Academy. Not as a cautionary tale as I'd hoped, but as a shining example of innovative problem solving. They're calling it the human approach to observable reality modification, or THARM for short. Miranda Rodriguez has since revolutionized reactor design across the galaxy. Her patent for what she insists on calling whoopsie-daisy containment field generation is now the industry standard. Yes, that's the official name. She refused to call it anything else. Dr. Blake Chun published a groundbreaking paper titled Quantum Uncertainty versus Human Certainty. Why being sure it will work sometimes makes it work. It's now required reading for all xenobiologists, though it's reportedly caused at least 3 nervous breakdowns among peer reviewers. As for me, I found peace in my new career, teaching theoretical physics to young minds on my homeworld, far from any reactors, humans, or coffee machines. Though I've heard they're hiring their first human professor next semester. Perhaps the most telling change of all? The Galactic Engineering Corps now requires safety inspectors to ask themselves one simple question when evaluating human facilities. Is this actually dangerous or just theoretically impossible? The final addition to the new protocols, written by Miranda herself, reads, "Sometimes the laws of physics need a friendly reminder about who's boss. May the universe have mercy on us all." Though, knowing humans, they'd probably just negotiate with it if it didn't. End report *P.S. Miranda just sent me a message. She's developed something she calls a probability actualization matrix. Apparently, it makes impossible things happen on purpose now instead of by accident. I'm not going back to check. Some things are better left unknown *.